Thousand Tales presents Prosthetics by Godfrey, read by Matthew Carson. So, where do we go from here? Lucinda gazed into the eyes, or rather each eye, of Eisen, while the sun poured green light upon them, him opposite her, herself sitting here in this chair so like a black spider, its legs wrapped sinuously about themselves. And every few moments, she felt the chair breathing, subtle, soft legs vibrating, barely perceptible, except now she knew. And Eisen knew she knew. They had met 12 days earlier. Lucinda, her dark hair a contrast to the pale, almost white, of the peoples here, had been sent as rudimentary ambassador, first tenuous step toward formal relations. And the native inhabitants, especially Eisen, had done all they could to make her welcome. The city? Why, it seemed so oddly terrestrial. The streets seemed paved, each stone smoothed, and had she realized sooner would have recognized the streets as being ones she had already seen when she was 3, and her parents had taken her to some now lost remnant of a place that didn't exist. The food? She gazed at the table, and its rounded perfection matched perfectly with a table she had seen her grandmother use. Once, just once, when she was 5 and her grandmother, seemingly eternal, had stooped down to her and offered her a candy, the exact same candy, positioned in the bowl the color of malachite. She reached for one and let it slide delicately against her tongue. People here called this a cultural delicacy. But of course, this cultural delicacy hadn't existed until 12 days ago. The people? They seemed humanoid, approximately her size. She herself stood 5 feet 4 inches in height. Until now, she'd never noticed no one walking on the streets exceeded that height. Her height. An entire population tailored after one person, one stranger who had never been here before. Eisen took a candy from the bowl, let it roll between his fingers, and for a moment she marveled at the action. Each finger joint copied perfectly how a human would do it, singular movement, as if the joints could only function like a human hand. But this wasn't really true. Eisen. What was it? What memory had they used? A past lover? An older friend her older sister knew? Perhaps she had never consciously been aware of her feelings, but they had been aware. She stared at him a moment. Her own features were slightly angular, her hands slender, her body little more than 120 pounds. The being sitting before her was slightly larger, not taller, but somehow he exuded a presence, as if some giant were sitting before her. Of course, in a sense, there was. His clothing rustled a moment, grayish clothes, which they assured her could be manufactured and sent back to Earth. They assured her, the ministers of commerce, that the cloth was easy to create. She smiled wryly now. Of course it was easy to create. His clothing rustled, but there was no wind. There was never any wind. In 12 days, she hadn't felt a breeze. Perhaps that was when she'd first realized her error, the subtle falseness of the place. No wind, and the sun, how greenly it gleamed, tinting everything. Except the candy wasn't green, the clothing. Was that it? Her memories, did they affect the illusion enough that even the sun's light couldn't touch them? Was that why at odd intervals the green roads became gray or white, the lost roads of her childhood peering out like centipedes from under the canopy of the illusion? But before her realization, there had been 12 days, 8 of them in the intimate company of him, her, them. So, where do we go from here? What do you want from us? Eisen asked. It was not an accusation. There was a strange, muted quality to his voice now, a neutral tone which contrasted with the affable bass of his voice from before, from memories of whatever real or illusionary lover she had imagined before. Lucinda put her chin in her left hand and stared at him, them, a moment. "Did we frighten you this much?" she asked finally. The chair shuddered a moment, and then grew very still. The candy, the small rounded object, dropped from his fingers. They were having a hard time keeping it all together. She had first realized the full extent of the deception yesterday. Yes, there was no wind and the roads shifted color, but the full extent of the deception occurred when last night she had gazed up, absently with thoughts of home, and suddenly there it was in the night sky. The constellation of Orion, seen from a world 100 light-years from Earth, existing at such an angle to make the constellation an impossibility. All this was a lie. So rather than share Eisen's bed, she had wandered the streets instead, arriving at this copy of some other memory perhaps, and here he had come and sat, watching her. It would have been impossible for her to avoid him. His eyes were watching her everywhere. "You could have told me the truth," she said finally. He stopped. "And why all this? If we terrify you, why show me all this beauty? Surely that would draw attention. Surely I'd want to stay." She stared at him quizzically a moment, and then grew still. "You are." He paused, and then she realized he wasn't pausing. They were trying to work out the right words, and all of them coalesced to a single point. "You are the first ones we've encountered." A world the size of the Earth, composed of who knows many components, a world of gigatrillions perhaps. Each stone, each blade of grass, part of a parliament of being, and still they were lonely. "Why don't you drop the disguise and we can say greet each other properly?" "What about?" "About us. Been on 14 planets now. Met species. Well, I imagine you know the kinds of beings we found. You've seen them." She tapped her head a moment with a finger. "Here." She reached out a hand. "If this is the end, I'd like to at least know your face." He reached out with trembling fingers and took her hand in his. Then she watched as the hand gave way. Sinews relaxed, and suddenly his hand was in hers, while his wrist slid back. She stared at it a moment, clinically, watching as the fingers detached, each one falling to the table like small worms, each slowly shifting to a rhythm. The forearm, in fact, also detached. Clothing dissolved to the ground and pooled like small snakes. Forearm crawled backward away from her, and she stared up at his face as first his nose, then his upper palate crawled sideways and dropped to the ground. The cavity of his face widened as his eyes pulled themselves from the sockets, and one of them used long threads to adhere to the wall, while the other returned to the socket. His right eye, their right eye. Of course, she realized, he too was little more than a prosthetic as the streets slowly breathed, and the chair shuddered again, and looking at the back of it noticed a small row of serrated teeth at the top as the table on spindling legs moved sideways into the road. And in all this she never batted an eye. When it was over, when streets and windows stopped breathing, when Eisen had been reduced to its component parts, each piece as sentient as herself, when the world stopped building the vast illusion of her past, this woman, the proxy of people and places so far removed as to be in another reality, from this one, stopped, gazed at the hollowed-out wreck of the being she had loved, and then smiled. "It's nice to finally meet you," she said. The end.